You needed a place to stand. I had a door. Those 10 words. That was all Emma Carter said when 60 strangers walked into her life on the worst night of the year. She didn't know their names. She didn't know their history. She only knew a man was bleeding on her doorstep. The storm wasn't letting up, and every single person in town had told her to lock that door and don't look back. She opened it anyway. And the morning that followed changed everything she thought she knew about survival family and what it means to be truly seen. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that night. The storm rolled in from the west around 8 o'clock. The kind of Arizona desert storm that doesn't announce itself politely. It comes sideways. It comes angry. The wind picked up so fast that Emma Carter barely had time to drag the outdoor sign inside before it would have been halfway to New Mexico. She was already exhausted. She'd been on her feet since 5 that morning, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that today the bank had called again. The same woman with the same professional voice and the same words that felt like a hand slowly closing around her throat. 62 days. That was what she had. 62 days before the property went into formal foreclosure proceedings. Emma had hung up the phone, stood in the kitchen of Carter's Cafe for about 30 seconds, then gone back to refilling the napkin dispensers. Because what else were you supposed to do? Her daughter Lily was in the back booth with her coloring books and a plate of buttered toast, the way she was most evenings when Emma couldn't find or afford a babysitter. Lily was 7 years old and already had the particular skill of knowing when not to ask her mother questions. She could read the room the way kids do when they have grown up watching someone they love hold the world together with both hands. The cafe had been Emma's father's. Ray Carter had built it from nothing, not from a loan, not from family money, but from 10 years of working the highway and saving every dollar that didn't have somewhere more urgent to go. He'd opened Carter's Cafe when Emma was 12, and she'd spent her entire adolescence behind that counter, learning how to make coffee, how to talk to truck drivers, how to spot a man who hadn't eaten in 2 days and needed a bowl of soup more than he needed a menu. Ray Carter had died 4 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. Emma had inherited the cafe along with his debts, his outdated equipment, and his absolute belief that the place mattered, that it served a purpose, that the highway needed somewhere decent to stop. She had tried. God, she had tried. Her husband Marcus was supposed to be her partner in it. He'd talked a big game about renovating the kitchen, expanding the menu, getting the cafe online somehow. What he'd actually done was spend 3 years borrowing against the property without telling her, and then disappearing on a Tuesday morning when Lily was 4 years old, leaving behind a handwritten note, an empty joint account, and debts Emma hadn't even known existed until the collectors started calling. So Emma worked. She worked because Lily needed her to. She worked because her father had built something worth saving. She worked because she didn't know how to do anything else. But 62 days, she turned off the open sign at 8:15. The storm was getting worse and she hadn't seen a customer in over an hour. She was counting the register. She always counted it herself, not because she didn't trust anyone, but because there was no one else when she heard it. The sound came from everywhere at once, deep, mechanical, thunderous. It cut through the storm noise like something primordial. Emma looked up from the register. Through the front window, she could see headlights. Not one set, not 5, dozens of headlights swinging into the parking lot like a river of light bending off the highway. Motorcycles. She stood completely still for a moment, watching them pull in, one after another, after another. Her parking lot wasn't big enough for this many vehicles. They were spreading into the gravel on the sides of the overflowed dirt lot she never bothered paving. She counted without meaning to. 20, 30. The number kept climbing. Mama, Lily appeared at her elbow, coloring book still in hand, staring at the windows. "Go sit in the back," Emma said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. "Who are they? People who need to get out of the rain. Go sit in the back, sweetheart." Lily didn't move right away. She pressed her nose to the glass the way 7-year-olds do, completely unaware that this might be a situation requiring caution. "There's a lot of them," she observed. "I know. Back booth, please." She waited until she heard Lily's sneakers squeaking toward the back. Then she moved to the phone behind the counter and picked it up. Not to call for help, just to have it in her hand. The motorcycles kept coming. Then she saw him. A man near the entrance, not walking toward the cafe, but down. One moment he was upright, leaning against a bike, and the next his legs went out from under him, and he hit the ground hard, not the slow crumple of someone who sat down, but the sudden collapse of someone whose body just quit. Two riders were on him, immediately crouching, calling his name. One of them looked up toward the cafe, and their eyes met Emma's through the glass. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Emma put the phone down. She picked up her keys. She stood at the front door for exactly 3 seconds, thinking about every warning she'd ever been given, every story she'd ever heard, every piece of advice that all amounted to the same thing: don't. Then she unlocked the door and pushed it open. The wind nearly took it out of her hand. The cold hit her instantly, and the noise, the rumble of engines still running, the storm voices calling to each other across the parking lot, it hit her like a physical thing. She stepped outside without a jacket and walked toward the man on the ground. "What happened to him?" she asked, kneeling beside the two men already there. The closer one looked at her like she was something he hadn't expected. He was big, leather-jacketed, probably 50, with a beard that had been weathered by years of highway wind. He had the kind of face that had settled into seriousness so completely, it looked almost like anger. He was hurt in an accident back on the highway an hour ago. He's been holding on, but is he conscious? In and out. Emma put her hand on the injured man's forehead. He was cold and sweating at the same time, which was never a good sign. His breathing was shallow but steady. She'd seen her father deal with highway accidents before. Ray Carter had kept a basic first aid kit stocked and had never once waited for someone else to handle a crisis. She was her father's daughter. "We need to get him inside," she said. "Can you carry him?" The big man stared at her. "You're letting us in." "I'm not letting him stay on the ground in a storm," Emma said. "Can you carry him, or do you need help?" The man blinked. "I've got him." She stood up and turned around. The parking lot was still filling. There had to be 60 of them now, maybe more, clustering in groups, some still on bikes, some already standing and watching her. The silence that had fallen over the lot, or as close to silence as 60 idling motorcycles could get, was strange. She felt every set of eyes on her. She was aware that she was 5'4", 130 pounds, wearing a cafe apron, and standing in the middle of a stormy parking lot in Arizona facing 60 strangers in road gear. She turned back toward the door. "If you need to get out of the storm," she said loud enough to carry, "come inside." She walked back into the cafe without looking to see who followed. They all followed. She pulled chairs from stacked positions against the wall. She unlocked the back room where they kept folding chairs for when the cafe was used for local events, and she started setting them up along the wall. She turned on the large coffee urns that she'd already been cleaning for the night and started them running again. Her hands moved automatically. Her brain had gone to a place she recognized, the place that took over during a crisis. The calm, mechanical place that cataloged what needed to happen in what order. The man who'd been on the ground, Michael Dawson, she'd learn his name later, was laid on the long booth seat near the back. She sent someone to get the first aid kit from under the counter. She checked his pulse, herself checked his breathing, ran her hands carefully along his arms and legs, looking for anything that felt wrong. He had cracked ribs, she suspected. Maybe worse. But he was breathing and his pulse was present and steady, and the worst thing she could do for cracked ribs was move him more than necessary. "Has anyone called an ambulance?" she asked, a voice from behind her. "Highway accident backed up emergency services for 2 hours out. They've got us on the list, but..." "So we wait," Emma said. "Keep him still. Keep him warm." She paused. "What's his name?" "Michael," the same voice said. "Michael Dawson." "Oh, okay." She looked at Michael Dawson's face. He was in his 40s, she guessed, weathered the same way the other man was, with old scars on his chin that had turned white with age. "Michael," she said, "you're inside, you're warm, help is coming. Stay with me." His eyes fluttered but didn't open. "Stay with me," she said again, not loud, just clear. She stood up and turned around and really looked at her cafe for the first time since they'd come in. There were people everywhere, every booth, every counter stool, people sitting on the floor against the walls, people standing in the aisles. The noise was enormous: voices, boots on linoleum, the hiss of the coffee urns, the storm hammering the windows. The place smelled like wet leather and engine oil, and something underneath, that something she couldn't name. That was just the smell of a lot of people who'd been outside in the cold for too long. She had 60 people in a cafe built for 30. She had coffee running and one pie left from the day's baking and a refrigerator full of hamburger she'd been planning to use tomorrow. She had 62 days left on her property. She walked behind the counter and started cooking. A man materialized at her elbow about 20 minutes later. Not young, probably late 50s, the kind of build that suggested a younger version of himself had been genuinely intimidating, and the current version was still nothing to dismiss. He wore a president's patch on his jacket. His name, she'd learned, was Jack Reynolds, chapter president, 23 years. His face was the kind of face that had been in enough rooms to know how rooms worked. He looked at her the way a person looks at something that doesn't fit their existing categories. "You need to tell me what you want," he said. Emma looked up from the grill. "I'm sorry, for this," he gestured at the room behind him. "What do you want for this?" "I want everyone to get a hot meal and somewhere warm to sit until the storm passes," she said. "That's what I want." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." She flipped a burger. "I don't want anything, Mr. Reynolds, Jack Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, you had a man down in my parking lot in a storm that wasn't letting up. What would you have had me do?" He looked at her carefully. "People would have called the police and locked the door. Most people aren't me." "No," he said, after a pause that had some weight in it. "They're not." I didn't say anything else. He went back into the room. She watched him move through the crowd, saying something here, quieting something there, moving with the particular authority of a man who didn't need to raise his voice because he never had to. She kept cooking. Around midnight, the ambulance finally came for Michael Dawson, two paramedics, professional and efficient, who confirmed what Emma had suspected about the ribs and added a probable concussion to the list. One of them, as he passed Emma on the way out, said, "You stabilized him right. Good call keeping him still." She nodded. She didn't say what she was thinking, which was that she was terrified the whole time. The storm didn't let up until after 1 in the morning. By then, Emma had served hamburgers, grilled cheese, and eggs to 60 people, brewed enough coffee to fill a small swimming pool, and lost count of how many times she'd refilled cups. Her feet had stopped hurting somewhere around 11:30, which she recognized as the point past which your body just goes quiet about certain things. Lily had fallen asleep in the back booth, curled under Emma's jacket, one arm draped over her coloring book like she was protecting it. Around 1:30, Emma finally stopped moving for long enough to lean against the counter with a cup of coffee and just breathe. She looked out at the room. The noise had quieted considerably. Some people were sleeping in booths. Some were talking in low voices. The storm was tapering, still loud, but losing its urgency, the windows vibrating less now. Jack Reynolds was sitting at the counter 2 seats down from her. He had a cup of coffee, and he was watching the room the way she imagined he always watched rooms, steadily cataloging, accountable. He looked at her. "You've been on your feet for how long?" he said. "Since 5 this morning." "Yesterday morning," he said, "because it was past midnight." "That's 20 hours. Comes with the job." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "You do this alone?" "Yes. Every day." "Every day." He looked at the room again, then back at her. "Why, by—" Emma thought about the question. It was a real question, not rhetorical, and it deserved a real answer. "My father built this place," she said. "He believed it mattered. I believe it matters." She shrugged. "And I have a daughter. You keep going for your reasons." "What happened to your husband?" It was a blunt question, the kind she'd normally deflect. Something about the hour or the exhaustion or something in his face that wasn't prying but just direct made her answer honestly. "He left," she said, 3 years ago, left debts behind that I didn't know about, and a property the bank is going to take in 62 days if I can't turn things around." She heard herself say it out loud and felt a familiar tightening in her chest. "So, that's where I am." He held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. She couldn't name it exactly. Not pity, something older than pity. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it like he meant it. "Don't be," she said. "I'm still here." A small disturbance from the far corner pulled both their attentions. 2 of the bikers were on their feet, voices rising, the kind of argument that could go sideways fast if no one intervened. Emma was already coming around the counter when Jack Reynolds said quietly, without raising his voice, "Enough." The room went still. Not dramatically, just still. The 2 men sat back down. Emma looked at Jack Reynolds. He was already looking back at her, his expression unchanged. "You'll run things quietly," she said. "Louds for people who aren't sure they'll be listened to," he said. She almost smiled. She went back behind the counter. By 2 in the morning, the storm had broken and the bikers were moving toward the door in small groups, checking their bikes, helping each other assess damage. The mechanical problems were real. Some bikes had been knocked over in the accident and sustained damage that would need proper repair. Emma heard fragments of conversation about tow trucks and arrangements, the logistics of 60 people and their machines getting from here to wherever here was supposed to have delivered them. Jack Reynolds was one of the last to approach the counter. He set down cash, a folded stack of bills that Emma didn't pick up immediately because she could see without counting that it was far more than the night's food and coffee was worth. "I can't take all of this," she said. "It's not charity," he said. "It's payment." Payment for what? The food wasn't. Not just for the food. He looked at her directly. For Michael, for the door, for treating 60 people like they were worth treating right. He paused. "You'd be surprised how rarely that happens." Emma picked up the bills. Her hands were steady. "Thank you," she said. "No," he said. "Thank you." He turned toward the door, stopped, didn't look back when he said, "Get some sleep, Emma Carter. You've earned it." She watched him go, watched the last of the bikes pull out of the parking lot, their tail lights disappearing down the highway one by one until there was just the ordinary darkness of a desert night with the storm moving east. The cafe was empty except for her, and Lily asleep in the back booth. Emma looked at the room. The mess was real, cups everywhere, chairs pulled into configurations. No restaurant designer had intended the grill that needed scrubbing, the floor that needed mopping, the ordinary aftermath of an extraordinary night. She picked up her daughter without waking her and carried her to the small office in the back where there was a cot she kept for exactly this kind of occasion. She laid Lily down, tucked the jacket around her, and stood there for a moment in the dark listening to her daughter breathe. Then she went back out to the counter. She picked up the bills Jack Reynolds had left, counted them. Her hands stopped moving. She counted again. It was enough to cover the electric bill. It was enough to cover the water bill. It was nearly a third of what she owed the bank for the month. Emma Carter stood alone in her empty cafe at 2:30 in the morning, 62 days from losing everything, holding money she hadn't asked for, and she did not cry. She thought she might. The pressure was there behind her eyes and her chest. But she didn't cry. She put the money in the register. She picked up a dish rag. She started cleaning because the cafe opened at 5. And she still had 62 days to figure out the rest. Outside, the highway was quiet again. The last few clouds from the storm were scattering east, and the sky above the desert was clearing the way. It only does after a hard rain completely ruthlessly into something so full of stars it looked like someone had spilled light. Emma didn't see it. She was scrubbing the grill. But somewhere out there on 60 motorcycles headed toward the morning word was beginning to move. The way word moves in a close community. The way word moves when someone does something that stops people in their tracks and makes them turn to the person next to them and say, "Did you hear what happened in Arizona? Did you hear about the woman with the cafe? Did you hear what she did?" Emma didn't know that yet. She was still thinking in terms of 62 days and overdue bills and whether she had enough eggs for the morning rush. She had no idea what was coming down the highway toward her. She had no idea that the door she opened that night wasn't just a door. It was the beginning of everything. She didn't sleep. That was the first thing. Emma Carter went back to cleaning the cafe at 2:30 in the morning, and she was still at it when the sky outside turned from black to gray to the particular bruised purple that meant dawn was 20 minutes away. She mopped the floor twice. She wiped down every table. She restacked the chairs and ran the coffee urns through their cleaning cycle and stood at the grill with a scrub brush long after the grill was clean, just needing something to do with her hands. Her brain wouldn't stop. She kept replaying the night in fragments. Michael Dawson's body hitting the ground, the weight of 60 strangers filling a room. She'd almost locked Jack Reynolds' voice saying enough and the room going quiet like someone had hit a switch. The money in the register, the number she'd counted twice. It didn't fix everything. She knew that. It bought her time, not salvation. But there was something about the night that sat in her chest differently than other hard nights had. Like it meant something she hadn't figured out yet. She made herself eat at 4:30. Scrambled eggs and toast, standing at the counter the way she always ate when she was alone, because sitting down at an empty table felt worse somehow. She checked on Lily twice. Both times the girl was completely unconscious, one arm hanging off the cot, coloring book clutched to her chest like a stuffed animal. The morning regulars started arriving at 5:15. Gus Tanner, the truck driver who stopped every Tuesday and Thursday on his Phoenix to Albuquerque run, came in first the way he always did, dropped himself onto his usual stool, and looked around the cafe the way a man looks at a room when something in it has changed, but he can't immediately identify what. "Smells like oil and coffee in here," he said. "It usually smells like coffee," Emma said. She poured his cup without being asked. "And oil. Had some guests last night." Gus looked at her. He was 61 years old and had spent 40 of those years behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler, which meant he'd seen enough to have opinions about most things in the good sense to keep most of those opinions to himself. He picked up his coffee. "What kind of guests?" "The stranded kind," Emma said. "Highway accident closed things down. They needed somewhere to sit." Gus turned his cup in his hands the way Jack Reynolds had done the night before, and Emma registered the similarity without knowing what to do with it. "They treat you right." "They were fine," she said. And then because it was Gus and he'd been coming in for 3 years and he'd never once made her feel like she owed him anything. "They were more than fine, actually." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said, like the conversation was settled. It wasn't. By 9 in the morning, the story was moving through the town of Ridgecrest, the way stories always move through small towns, in pieces. Each piece slightly altered by the person carrying it, until the accumulation of all those slightly altered pieces added up to something that bore a general resemblance to what actually happened and a specific resemblance to nothing. Emma heard 3 different versions before noon. In the first version, she'd called the police and the bikers had left without incident. In the second version, the bikers had ransacked the cafe. In the third, which reached her through Donna Parrish, who ran the hair salon 3 blocks down, Emma had armed herself with a shotgun and negotiated a peaceful outcome. Emma had no shotgun. She'd told them to come inside and cooked hamburgers for 4 hours. But she understood that the truth wasn't really what the story was about. What the story was about in every version was the question of what kind of woman Emma Carter was. She found out what the town thought around noon when Pastor Gerald Webb came in. He was 73, white-haired, slow-moving, and had been the pastor of the First Community Church since before Emma was born. He sat down at the counter and folded his hands on top of it, the way he folded them during difficult conversations, and Emma's stomach tightened before he said a word. "I heard about last night," he said. "I figured you did." "Emma," he paused, chose his words with the deliberateness of a man who'd been choosing words carefully for 50 years. "Those people, the ones you let in, you understand who they are, what they represent." "I understand a man was hurt and the storm wasn't letting up," she said. She kept her voice even. "I understand I had a door and they needed to come through it." "That's very Christian of you," he said. And the way he said it made clear he didn't entirely mean it as a compliment. "But your father would have wanted you to be careful." "My father," Emma said, and she heard her own voice sharpen in a way she hadn't intended, "would have done exactly what I did. Probably faster." Pastor Webb looked at her for a long moment. "You've got a daughter to think about." "I know I do." She held his gaze. "And I want her to grow up watching me treat people right, even when it's inconvenient, even when it scares other people." He left without ordering anything. Emma watched the door close behind him and stood with her hand flat on the counter, breathing. The afternoon brought more of it. Linda Marsh from the town council stopped by under the pretext of getting a slice of pie and spent 15 minutes dropping careful, considerate, sounding suggestions about how Emma might want to be thoughtful about the reputation of the cafe. Tom Briggs, who owned the way station 2 blocks over and had been quietly resentful of Emma's property since her father died, apparently told 3 people at the hardware store that Emma was going to bring trouble down on all of them. Emma cooked. She served. She smiled at the people who deserved smiling at and kept her expression neutral for the ones who didn't. She refilled coffee cups and calculated tip percentages and tried not to think about what 62 days actually looked like when you broke it into hours. Lily came out of the office around 9, still half asleep, climbed onto her counter stool and ate cereal without asking about the night before. She had Emma's particular quality of processing things at her own pace in her own time. Emma had learned not to rush it. Around 2 in the afternoon, Lily said out of nowhere, "The big man was nice." Emma looked up from the register. "Which big man?" "The one with the gray beard. He fixed my crayon." Emma went still. "When did you talk to him?" "Last night, when you were cooking. My red crayon broke and I was crying a little and he sat down and fixed it with tape. He had tape on his jacket. He said red was his favorite color too." Emma tried to identify who that might have been. She hadn't been watching Lily every second she'd been at the grill at the coffee urns at Michael Dawson's side. Any number of people could have crossed paths with her daughter without Emma seeing. "He fixed it nice," Lily added. "Better than new." Emma looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she went back to the register. She didn't know what she was supposed to do with that. She filed it in the same place she was filing everything about the previous night, the category of things that didn't fit her existing understanding of how the world worked. The next morning brought a phone call that nearly stopped her heart. It was the bank, not the professional woman with the careful voice. The branch manager himself, a man named Dennis Harlow, who had the particular quality of people who deliver bad news with expressions of great personal regret while experiencing no personal regret whatsoever. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I wanted to let you know that we've received your payment for this month's obligation, and I do want to flag that while we appreciate—" "My payment," Emma said. "What payment?" A brief pause. "The electronic transfer. Received this morning for the full monthly amount." Emma sat down. Her legs did it for her before her brain had given the instruction. "I didn't make a transfer." Another pause. Longer. "Ms. Carter, the payment was made. It's been applied to your account. I'm only calling to let you know that the who made the transfer. I'm not at liberty to who made the transfer, Mr. Harlow." The pause was very long this time. "It came from a third-party account. I really am not in a position to provide details beyond confirming that your account is current for this month." He finished the call with professional phrases about continued communication and Emma's future obligations, and she heard exactly none of it because her brain had stopped at the same point and was staying there. Someone had paid her bank, not a partial payment, the full month. She sat with the phone in her lap after the call ended and thought very carefully about who she knew with the ability to find her bank information and the resources to pay a month's commercial mortgage without being asked. The list was short. The list was in fact a list of one. She didn't have a number for Jack Reynolds. She hadn't thought to ask, and he hadn't thought to offer. She had 60 people's worth of memory from a single stormy night and no way to reach any of them. She went through the rest of the day with that information sitting in her chest, dense and unresolved. She didn't tell anyone. Not Gus Tanner when he came in Thursday morning. Not Lily, who was too young for the complicated weight of it. Not the version of herself that wanted to be angry because she hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted charity, had spent 3 years building a careful pride around managing her own problems. She wasn't sure she was angry. That was the complicated part. She wasn't sure what she was. On Friday, she found the note. It was under the front door when she came in at 5 to open up a plain white envelope with Emma written on the front in handwriting that was direct and economical, each letter committed to without flourish. She opened it, standing in the doorway, the morning air still cold from the night. The note was short. It said, "You kept a man alive and 60 people warm. You asked for nothing. You deserve better than what you've been dealt. This doesn't make us even. There is no even. It's just the right thing." J.R. Emma read it twice, then she folded it and put it in her apron pocket and opened the cafe. By 10 that morning, she'd taken it out and reread it 4 more times. The weekend passed quietly. The town's buzz about the night of the storm began to cycle toward other subjects the way small town attention always did. There was a zoning dispute about the new development on the east side of Ridgecrest, and the high school football team had lost a game they were expected to win, and these things occupied the conversational real estate that Emma's bikers had briefly held. She was almost relieved. The less talk, the fewer opinions she had to nod through. Monday changed that. She was doing the breakfast rush, not a big rush. It was never a big rush, but steady enough to keep her moving, when the door opened and a woman she didn't recognize came in. Mid-40s, professional looking, in the particular way of someone who worked in media or communications. She had a tablet under her arm and the alert, assessing look of someone who'd already formed their first impression and was in the process of refining it. She sat at the counter. She ordered coffee. Then she said, "Are you Emma Carter?" Depends on who's asking, Emma said. The woman smiled, not unkindly. My name is Christine Adler. I'm a freelance journalist. I've been writing about community resilience stories. I heard what happened here 10 days ago, and I'd love to talk to you about it. Emma poured the coffee, set it down. How did you hear about it? Social media, actually. Someone in the biker community posted about it. It's been shared quite a bit, she paused. Quite a bit more than you might think. Emma looked at her. How much is quite a bit? Christine turned her tablet around. It was a post from a page Emma didn't recognize with a photo she had also never seen. Someone must have taken it from outside through the window during the night, catching Emma at the grill with the cafe packed full behind her. She looked small in the frame. She looked determined. The post had been shared 47,000 times. Emma put both hands flat on the counter. The number didn't fully process. It was the kind of number that required a different framework than the one she operated in, a framework built for larger scales than cafe registers and monthly mortgage payments. 47,000, she said. As of this morning, Christine said, it was at 60,000 by the time I drove here. Emma picked up the coffee cup she'd poured, realized she hadn't poured it for herself, set it back down. Noun, I just made food, she said. That's all I did. I know, Christine said. That's exactly the story. Emma looked at the tablet for another long moment. Then she looked up. I have a breakfast rush to finish, she said. Come back at 2, I'll talk to you. Christine came back at 2. They sat in the corner booth, the one farthest from the counter, and talked for an hour and a half. Emma told it straight, no embellishment, no drama. Added just the facts of that night in the order they happened. Christine asked good questions, the kind that came from someone who'd been doing this long enough to know that the best stories didn't need decoration. They just needed the right questions to pull them out into the light. She asked about Ray Carter. She asked about Marcus leaving. She asked about the 62 days. Emma answered all of it. She wasn't sure why. Something about the moment felt like a door she was supposed to walk through. When Christine left, Emma sat in the booth for a few minutes alone. Lily was at school. The cafe was empty in the mid-afternoon lull. The note from Jack Reynolds was still in her apron pocket. She'd moved it to a fresh apron every morning, which she only admitted to herself and not to anyone else. She thought about 47,000 people seeing that photo. 60,000. She thought about what that meant and couldn't quite get there. Her frame of reference for scale was the 18 stools at her counter and the 11 tables in her dining room. 60,000 was an abstraction. What wasn't abstract was what happened the following Thursday. She was at the register when she heard it. The sound was familiar now, not alarming, not threatening, just specific. That particular deep mechanical rumble that had a different quality than truck engines or regular traffic. She looked up before she consciously registered what she was hearing. 2 motorcycles were pulling into the parking lot. Just 2. She recognized them from their size and their bikes, or she thought she did. She couldn't be certain. They parked and came inside, and she knew them the moment they pushed through the door. The larger one was the man who'd been crouched over Michael Dawson in the parking lot that night. He'd told her his name at some point, Danny. She thought Danny Ortiz. The other one was younger, maybe 30, with a quiet, watchful manner that reminded her of someone trying very hard not to get in the way. Danny Ortiz sat at the counter. He put his hands on it the way someone does when they're not sure of their welcome and they want to show they're not a threat. How is he? Emma said. Michael Dawson. Danny blinked, like he hadn't expected that to be the first thing she said. He's going to be okay. Cracked ribs, concussion. They kept him 3 days. He's home now. Good, Emma said. She poured 2 coffees without asking. Does he need anything? Danny stared at her. Does he know, ma'am? He's got people. He wrapped both hands around the cup. He asked us to come. He wanted someone to come in person. He said sending a note wasn't enough. Emma leaned on the counter. You didn't have to do that. He felt like we did. Danny looked down at his coffee. Ms. Carter, he said he told me to tell you that night when he went down, he thought that was it. He thought he was done. He said the last thing he saw before he lost consciousness was you coming across that parking lot toward him, and he said, he stopped, cleared his throat. He said you were the only person in that town who came toward him instead of away. The cafe was quiet. The younger man was looking at the counter. Danny Ortiz was looking at her. Emma was quiet for a moment. He would have done the same, she said, for someone else. I believe that. You don't know that. No, she said, but I believe it. Danny nodded slowly. He drank his coffee. After a while, he said, Jack wanted me to ask how are things with the cafe. Emma looked at him steadily. You can tell Jack that I know about the bank payment. Danny kept his expression carefully neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Emma said, not unkindly. Tell him I'm not angry. Tell him I understand why he did it the way he did it. Tell him, she paused, finding the words. Tell him I would have said no if he'd asked, and that he probably knew that, and that I'm choosing not to be stubborn about it. Something moved in Danny Ortiz's face, a small loosening. I'll tell him, he said. They drank their coffee. After a while, the conversation moved to easier things, the road, the weather, the way the desert was different in the fall than in the summer. The younger man's name was Carlos, and he had opinions about the best highway food in 3 states, and he was willing to share all of them, which livened things up considerably. They stayed 2 hours. They paid for their coffee and left a tip that was 3 times the bill. They shook Emma's hand at the door, both of them, which struck her as formal and deliberate in a way she appreciated. She watched them leave from the doorway. She was still standing there when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize as area code she couldn't place. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Ms. Carter, a man's voice. Professional, slightly formal. My name is Robert Inman. I'm a producer at KTAS News in Phoenix. We've been following your story and we'd love to schedule an interview. She said yes before he'd finished the sentence. She didn't know why, she just knew it was the right answer. That night after Lily was asleep, Emma sat at the kitchen table in the apartment above the cafe and tried to understand what was happening. The story had moved from 47,000 shares to 80,000 in 4 days. A Phoenix news station was calling. A journalist had already run a piece that was apparently circulating. 2 men had driven from wherever they'd come from to sit at her counter and tell her that Michael Dawson wanted her to know she'd mattered. She thought about what her father used to say. Not the quote she thought about on the night of the storm, the one about discovering who you truly are. The other one, the one he said when something happened that surprised him, when good came from somewhere he hadn't expected it. He used to say the road gives back what you put in it, just never on the schedule you expect. Emma looked at her kitchen table, at the note from Jack Reynolds that she'd moved from her apron to her pocket to the table, which was as close to a home as it was going to get. At the coffee ring from the cup she'd been drinking an hour ago. At the bills that were still real, still present, still accounting for the distance between where she was and where she needed to be. 54 days now, not 62 anymore. She'd gained 8 days somewhere in her head just from she didn't know, from the bank payment, from the money in the register, from the feeling that the equation might be shifting even if she couldn't see the full calculation yet. She folded the note back up, put it in her pocket. She went to check on Lily. Her daughter was sleeping on her stomach, arms spread wide the way she slept when she was deep under and nothing was going to touch her. Emma stood in the doorway for a long time just watching her breathe. The way parents do the specific watching that isn't surveillance but something closer to gratitude. A private documentation of the fact that this person exists and is real and is here. She thought about Michael Dawson in the parking lot, about what Danny Ortiz had said, the only person who came toward him instead of away. She wasn't sure if that made her brave. She wasn't sure it made her anything other than herself. But she was starting to understand that sometimes being yourself consistently, stubbornly, without apology was the most radical thing a person could do. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen table. She went back and looked at it. A text from a number she didn't have saved. Short, direct. It said, interview went live this morning. Thought you should know you're at 200,000 shares. People are listening. Emma Carter, Christine Adler. Emma put the phone face down on the table. She sat with it for a while. 200,000 people had seen a photo of her at her grill in her apron in her cafe doing the only thing she knew how to do. And somehow, impossibly, that was news. She picked up the phone. She typed a reply. Thank you for telling me. She paused, then added, I have to open the cafe at 5. She sent it. Christine's response came in under a minute. I know. That's the whole story. Emma looked at that for a long moment. Then she put the phone in her pocket next to the note and went to set her alarm. 4:45. Same as every morning. Because the cafe opened at 5. And the road her father had always said gave back what you put into it. She was beginning to believe him. The Phoenix interview aired on a Tuesday. Emma watched it alone after Lily was asleep on the small television in the back office, sitting in the chair she usually used to do paperwork. She'd done the interview 3 days earlier in the cafe itself before opening. Christine Adler, sitting off to the side while the news crew set up lights Emma hadn't asked for and a camera she kept forgetting to look at. The reporter, a polished woman named Sandra Reyes, who had warm eyes and a professional warmth that was nonetheless genuine, had asked questions that were sharper than they sounded. The kind of questions that seemed simple until you were in the middle of answering them and realized they'd gotten somewhere real. Emma watched herself on television and felt the particular strangeness of seeing yourself as other people see you. She looked tired. She thought like someone who had been tired for a long time and had made peace with that being a permanent condition. But there was something else in her face she hadn't expected to see, something that she couldn't name exactly. Not strength or not only strength, something quieter than that. Sandra Reyes had asked her near the end, "What do you want people to take from your story?" And Emma had said it on camera, looking directly at the reporter because she'd forgotten the camera was there. "I don't have a story. I have a cafe and a daughter and a door I opened. The rest of it isn't mine." She watched herself say that and thought it was probably true. The segment ran 4 minutes. By midnight, it had been shared 12,000 times from the station's social media page alone. By the time Emma's alarm went off at 4:45 the next morning, her phone had 43 unread notifications from numbers she didn't recognize. She silenced the phone and went to open the cafe. The breakfast rush that morning was different. Gus Tanner came in first as always, but today he brought someone, his brother-in-law, he said, who'd seen the segment and wanted to eat at the place. A couple from out-of-town road trippers who'd specifically detoured off the highway after seeing something shared on their daughter's social media. An older woman, 70-ish, white-haired and sharp-eyed, who sat at the counter for 45 minutes and didn't say anything about the news segment, but left a $40 tip on a $12 breakfast and squeezed Emma's hand on the way out without a word. Emma took all of it and kept moving. The trick she'd learned over years of difficult days was to stay in motion. The moment you stopped moving was the moment everything caught up with you, but the phone wouldn't stop. By mid-morning, she'd started letting calls go to voicemail. By noon, she'd filled the voicemail. By 2 in the afternoon, when Lily came home from school and sat at her usual counter stool and asked why there were so many people in the cafe on a Wednesday, Emma realized she didn't have a simple answer. "People heard about the bikers," she finally said. Lily considered this with 7-year-old seriousness. "The ones from the storm?" "Yes." "Are they coming back?" Emma paused in the middle of refilling a coffee cup. "I don't know, sweetheart." Lily nodded as if this was a satisfactory answer and went back to her homework. The call that changed everything came the next morning at 7:42. Emma was at the grill's 2 orders up when her phone rang, and she almost didn't answer it because she'd been not answering calls all morning. But something made her look at the screen, and the number had a Nevada area code, and she had a feeling she'd been learning to trust. She handed the spatula to the part-time teenager she'd managed to keep on 3 mornings a week and went to the back. "Emma Carter." The voice was Jack Reynolds, different over the phone than in person, slightly more contained, like he was choosing words more carefully without the ability to read a room in real time. "Yes," she said. "I take it you saw the news segment." "I did." "Are you angry?" She leaned against the wall. "Should I be?" A pause. "Some people would be, having their business put on television without complete control over it." Christine Adler was fair, Emma said. Sandra Reyes was fair. "Nobody put words in my mouth. If I wanted to not be on television, I shouldn't have given the interview." She paused. "Why are you calling Jack?" Another pause, longer, the kind that meant something was being organized. "The story traveled further than any of us expected," he said. "It's been shared in 12 states. I've had chapter presidents calling me from chapters that weren't anywhere near Arizona that night. People who've never met you." Emma said nothing. She was listening. "There's something happening," he said. "Something I didn't plan and can't fully control, which is not a situation I'm generally comfortable with." There was something almost dry in his voice when he said it, an edge of self-awareness. "People want to respond to what you did. There are resources, workers, people with skills, people who have things they want to contribute and nowhere specific to put them." Emma understood where this was going before he finished. She felt it arriving, like weather, the kind of feeling you have when you look at the sky and know what's coming even without the meteorology. "Jack, I'm not asking for permission," he said. "I'm telling you what's going to happen so you're not blindsided. I thought you deserved that." When, she said. Saturday. That's 3 days. I know. How many people are we talking about? The pause before his answer was the pause of a man choosing between the accurate number and the number that wouldn't cause someone to hang up the phone. More than 60, he said. She closed her eyes. How much more? Considerably. Emma stood in the back of her cafe with her hand pressed flat against the wall and the breakfast rush noise coming through the door, and thought about her father in 62 days and the note in her pocket, and Michael Dawson collapsed on wet asphalt. She thought about Pastor Webb's careful disapproval and Tom Briggs's resentment in the 43 notifications on her phone and the old woman who'd squeezed her hand. What do they need from me? Ihai, Mimi, she said. Tell me what needs to be done, he said. To the cafe. What it actually needs. Not what you can afford. What it needs. The list came to her immediately, the way it always did. She'd been carrying it so long and it was just part of her mental furniture. The grill was failing burners going out one by one. The refrigeration unit in the back was running at 70% and had been for 8 months. The wiring in the east wall was outdated and technically a hazard. She'd gotten a warning from the city inspector 6 months ago, with a deadline she'd extended twice. The roof over the storage room had a soft spot that needed addressing before winter. The parking lot needed resurfacing. The front counter's laminate was peeling off the base in places she'd been papering over with contact paper like a lie she told every day. She told him all of it, not edited, not softened. She'd decided at some point in the previous 5 seconds to just be honest and deal with whatever came from that. There was silence while he listened. Then he said, "Is that everything? That's the structural list," she said. "I have a longer personal one, but you didn't ask for that." She heard something that might have been a laugh, brief, quiet, almost immediately gone. "Saturday morning," he said, "have the cafe closed. We'll need access." "Jack," she stopped. "I haven't said yes yet." "No," he said, "you haven't." She thought about her daughter asking if they were coming back. She thought about the man with the gray beard, fixing a broken crayon with tape from his jacket because a 7-year-old was crying. She thought about what it had felt like to cook for 60 people in a room that was too small and too loud and somehow exactly right. "Saturday," she said, "come early." The days between Thursday and Saturday had a suspended quality, like the air before a storm, which Emma recognized having lived through one recently. She didn't tell many people. She told Lily, who received the information with the focused seriousness of someone mentally preparing. She told Gus Tanner on Friday morning because Gus had earned the right to hear things directly. He put down his coffee cup and looked at her for a long time. "You sure about this?" he said. "No," she said, "but I'm doing it anyway." He picked up his cup. "That's usually how the right decisions go," he said. She closed the cafe on Friday night with a strange feeling that she was closing something beyond just the doors, some chapter, some version of things. She walked through the room alone the way she did most nights, touching tables and chairs in a proprietary way she'd never been fully conscious of until recently. She stopped at the place on the east wall where she knew the wiring was bad, where she'd taped a piece of cardboard over the outlet because it sparks sometimes. She looked at it for a long moment. She went home and slept 6 hours. That was more than usual. They arrived at 6:30 Saturday morning. She heard them before she saw them. That sound, the one that was specific and unmistakable, the deep rolling, multiply-layered sound of motorcycles arriving in numbers. She was already up, already dressed, standing at the front window with a cup of coffee when the first lights appeared at the end of the access road. They kept coming. She'd asked Jack how many. He'd said considerably more than 60. She'd prepared herself for 100, maybe 150. She counted past 200 before she stopped counting. There were pickup trucks mixed in with the motorcycles, trucks loaded with lumber and equipment and things she couldn't immediately identify. There were vans. There were people climbing out of vehicles, holding tool bags and wearing work clothes, moving with the specific, organized energy of people who knew what they were there to do. There was a flatbed truck parked at the edge of the lot with a refrigeration unit strapped to it that was clearly commercial grade, clearly new. Emma put her coffee cup down very carefully. Her hands were not entirely steady. Jack Reynolds came in the front door without knocking, which was fine because the door was open. He looked the same as he had on the night of the storm, like someone who'd decided years ago what he was and had never seen the need to revisit the decision. "Morning," he said. There's a refrigerator on a flatbed in my parking lot, Emma said. That's actually a walk-in cooling unit, he said. Your current refrigeration is failing. We're replacing it. Jack, Emma. His voice was steady, not aggressive, just settled. We have electricians, a roofing crew, a grill fabricator from Tucson, and enough general labor to resurface your parking lot and rebuild your counter in a day and a half. I need you to let us work. She looked at him. She looked past him at the parking lot, at the trucks and the people in the flatbed with the cooling unit. She looked at the east wall where the bad wiring was behind the cardboard in the sparking outlet. What do I do? She said. You stay out of our way, he said. Or you help, your choice. But you don't fight us on this. She thought about arguing. The part of her that had managed alone for 3 years had opinions about accepting help at this scale, opinions that were loud and certain and entirely understandable. She heard those opinions out. She considered them with genuine seriousness. Then she said, I'll make coffee. Is that in the way? Something shifted in his face. Coffee is not in the way. She made coffee. She made a lot of it. The cafe transformed around her in a way that had no real comparison in her experience. It wasn't that she'd never seen construction or repair work. She'd done plenty of her own learning by necessity and YouTube video fixing what she could reach and deferring what she couldn't. But this was something else entirely. This was organized, skilled, purposeful work happening simultaneously in every part of the building, a kind of coordinated action that reminded her vaguely of watching a pit crew at a racetrack quality of many people doing specific things that all fit together into something larger. The east wall opened at 8:30. She heard the electrician, a man of about 50, who introduced himself as Frank, and had an air of someone who had forgotten more about electrical work than most people ever learn. She heard him say something from inside the wall that was not a pleasant sound. She crossed the room. What is it? Frank emerged from the wall cavity, holding a section of wiring that had blackened and partially melted in a way that was unambiguous. This was going to be a fire, he said, not dramatically, just as fact. Emma looked at it. She thought about all the mornings she'd opened the cafe alone, Lily in the back booth, the sparking outlet behind the cardboard. She thought about how many times she'd thought she'd get to it when she could afford to. How long, she said. How long before? Could have been last month, Frank said. Could have been next week. No way to know. He looked at her steadily. You're lucky. She went to the back office and sat down for about 4 minutes. Then she got up and went back out. Around 11, a car pulled into the lot. Not a motorcycle, not a truck. A regular car with a Ridgecrest Town seal on the door. Emma watched from the window as Tom Briggs climbed out of the passenger side. He was with a man she recognized as one of the town council members, a man named Garrett, who she'd seen at Linda Marsh's side. They stood at the edge of the lot for a moment looking at the work happening. Emma watched Tom Briggs's face do something complicated. He had spent a year and a half openly hoping the cafe would fail. She knew this because small towns made secrets impossible. He'd wanted the property, had made an offer to the bank she'd heard contingent on her defaulting. She watched him look at the cooling unit on the flatbed, at the roofing crew overhead, at the new lumber being carried through the side door. Then he looked directly at the window where she was standing. Emma didn't move. He looked away first. The town council man. Garrett walked over to where Jack Reynolds was standing with a clipboard supervising the lot work. Emma couldn't hear what he said, but she could read the body language. Garrett was doing something between assessment and challenge. The official stance of a man deciding where power sat in a situation he hadn't anticipated. Jack Reynolds listened to whatever he said. Then he said something back, brief, and held out the clipboard. Garrett looked at it. Then he took it. He studied whatever was on it, permits, Emma guessed, or something that functioned like permits, and after a long moment handed it back. He went back to the car. Tom Briggs was still standing there. Garrett said something to him, and Tom Briggs's jaw tightened, and then they both got in the car and drove away. Jack Reynolds looked at the window where Emma was standing. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her for a moment and then went back to the clipboard. Emma let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The afternoon came in fast the way Saturdays did when you were moving. By 3 o'clock, the east wall was fully rewired, and Frank was walking Emma through what had been done, showing her the updated panel, explaining things in terms she could follow, because he paid attention to whether she was following and adjusted accordingly. She appreciated that. She'd encountered too many tradespeople who explained things in the particular way that assumed she wouldn't understand and then took pride in the not understanding. The counter was coming down. That was the part that hit her unexpectedly. She'd known it was on the list, the laminate peeling the base, rotting in one corner. The surface that had been cleaned so many times, the pattern was worn away in specific places that mapped her movements during a shift. She'd known intellectually that the counter was going to be rebuilt. She hadn't understood what it would feel like to watch it go. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched two men carefully dismantle what her father had built or not built himself, but chosen years ago, when the cafe first opened, running his hands along it at the supplier's warehouse, the way people run their hands along things that feel like something permanent. She knew that story because he'd told it to her. He'd bought a counter for a place he was building to last. One of the workers noticed her standing there. He stopped. He said, "We can save the front piece if you want. The surface section, the actual top. We were going to replace it, but if it means something, we can work around it." Emma looked at the top surface. She thought about her father's hands on it, her own hands on it, Lily's small hands in the mornings, all the elbows and coffee cups and moments that had been lived right there. "Save the top," she said. "Work it into the new one if you can." "We can do that," he said. "Yeah, absolutely." She went back to the kitchen and made more coffee and did not think too hard about any of it. Lily arrived at 4, dropped off by her friend's mother who'd watched her for the day. She came through the front door and stopped, completely taking in the construction, the workers, the dismantled counter, the new wiring visible where the east wall was still partially open, the general organized chaos of a building being fixed. Then she walked directly to the center of the room and turned in a slow circle, looking at everything. "Mama," she said, not a question, just an observation. "I know," Emma said. Lily turned to look at her. "They came back." "They did. More of them this time." "A lot more." Lily turned in another slow circle. There was a man up a ladder near the back, doing something to the ceiling. There was someone running new pipe under the floorboards in the storage room, the trap door, open boots visible. There was the sound of drilling and hammering and voices calling to each other in the particular shorthand of people who work together regularly. Lily said, "Is the cafe going to be okay now?" Emma looked at her daughter, 7 years old, standing in the middle of everything, completely unafraid. "I think it might be," Emma said. Lily considered this. Then she went to find a stool to sit on and watch people work, which was evidently the most interesting thing that had happened to her in quite some time. Jack Reynolds found Emma at 5:30, standing outside in the cooling air away from the noise. She heard him come out behind her and didn't turn around. They stood side by side for a moment, looking at the parking lot that was half resurfaced, at the trucks and the motorcycles, at the organized evidence of a day's work. "Who are these people?" Emma said. "All of them. I've been watching them all day, and I can't figure out where they all came from." "Everywhere," he said. "Chapters from Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado. Some of them drove 2 days. Some of them sent money when they couldn't come themselves, and we hired workers with it." He paused. "A contractor in Tucson donated the cooling unit, said he'd seen the segment, and his wife had been in a situation once where someone helped when no one else did. He wanted to pay that forward." Emma processed this. The contractor who didn't know her. The people who'd driven 2 days, the money from strangers. "Why?" she said, not skeptically, genuinely. Jack was quiet for a moment. "Because what you did the night of the storm, it meant something. Not just to Michael, though it meant the most to him, but to everyone who was there." He paused again, longer this time. "A lot of us have been in places where people looked away. Physically sometimes, emotionally always. You looked directly at a situation most people would have avoided, and you just handled it. Like it was obvious." He turned to look at her. "It wasn't obvious. It was the opposite of obvious. But you made it look like it was." Emma stared at the parking lot for a while. The evening was coming, the temperature dropping the way it did in the desert, the light going sideways and turning everything orange. "My father used to say that kindness was a practice," she said. "Not a feeling, a practice. You do it even when you don't feel it, especially then, and eventually you stop being able to tell the difference." "Smart man," Jack said. "He was." She glanced at him. "How's your father?" She saw it land, the slight shift in his posture, something closing and then deliberately opening back up. "He died a long time ago," he said, "when I was 22. "I'm sorry." "He was a hard man," Jack said. "Not unkind, just hard. Didn't have a lot of room for the kind of thing your father was apparently made of. Emma nodded. She didn't push. She'd learned that some things needed space to exist in rather than questions to excavate them. After a moment, he said, I had a sister. She ran a diner in Nevada, different from a cafe, bigger highway, traffic, the whole thing. She passed 9 years ago. Cancer. Another pause. She was like you. The door was always open. People, strangers, came to her funeral who she'd fed for years. People she'd helped without ever being asked to. She'd been doing it the whole time, and I didn't pay enough attention. The air between them was quiet and still. What was her name? Emma said. Claire, he said. Emma let that sit where it was. You've been paying attention now, she said. That counts. He didn't answer, but something in the line of his shoulders changed. At 7 in the evening, one of the younger workers, maybe 25, covered in sawdust and clearly running on pure enthusiasm, came outside and said, The grill's up. You want to see it? Emma went inside. The new grill was beautiful. That was the only word for it. Commercial grade, the kind she'd looked up prices on twice and immediately closed the browser because the number was a different universe from where she lived. Clean, solid, perfectly level, fitted into the space like it had been designed for it. She put her hand on the surface. It was cold now, not yet turned on. She thought about how many mornings she'd stood at the old one, how she'd learned to work around its failing burners, the particular tilt to the right that meant you had to compensate when you were making eggs. She was going to have to learn a new grill. She found that she was smiling. One of the workers, a man she hadn't spoken to yet, older, soft-spoken, who'd been working on the refrigeration side of the kitchen all day, came over and stood beside her. He held out his hand. Tony Reyes, he said. I do refrigeration and kitchen setup professionally. I wanted to do this one right. She shook his hand. You knew Jack before this. We were in the same chapter 20 years ago, he said. I run my own business now. Commercial kitchen setup and repair primarily in Nevada. He looked at the grill. I drove down specifically for this. For a stranger's grill, Emma said. For the right stranger's grill, he said. She looked at him. What made you come? I thought about it. My daughter is 23, he said. She's doing it alone too. Different situation, different city, but alone. He looked at the grill. I came because I wanted the world to be the kind of world where somebody shows up when she needs it. He shrugged, a little self-conscious. This was the closest I could get to that right now. Emma stood very still for a moment. Something tightened in her chest, not painful, just full. The specific fullness of understanding something you hadn't understood before. Thank you, Tony, she said. Thank you, Ms. Carter, he said. He went back to work. She stayed by the grill alone for another minute, her hands still on the cold surface, the noise of the cafe working all around her, the smell of sawdust and fresh lumber, and underneath it, the permanent coffee smell that she'd stopped registering years ago. Her phone was buzzing in her pocket. She took it out. A number she didn't know. She answered anyway because the day had calibrated her in a particular direction. Is this Emma Carter? A woman's voice, young, slightly nervous. Yes. My name is Amy Walsh. I'm a student at Arizona State Communications major. I've been following your story, and I'm doing a piece for our university paper, and I was wondering if Amy, Emma said gently. Yes. I'm in the middle of something right now. Is it okay if you call back tomorrow? Oh yes, of course I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Tomorrow is good. Call in the afternoon. She hung up. She put the phone in her pocket. She turned around and looked at her cafe. People everywhere still working, the light inside warm against the darkening windows. The sound of hammering slowing now as the day's structural work finished and the finishing work began. She saw Lily on her stool in the corner, having apparently appointed herself the supervisor of one of the younger workers who seemed to be accepting this role with good humor. She saw Frank the electrician showing a man something on a panel, both of them nodding. She saw Jack Reynolds across the room, listening to someone's question, answering it with a brief efficiency that was its own kind of warmth. She saw in the specific way you see things that have been in front of you the whole time that the cafe was not just being repaired, it was being given back to her. And she understood, standing there with sawdust on her shoes and a dead man's countertop being worked into a new frame and a grill she hadn't asked for humming with possibility, that there were forms of grace that didn't announce themselves. That sometimes a door you opened for someone else ended up being the door you needed open for yourself. That the ledger of giving and receiving didn't always balance in ways you could predict or plan for. Her father had built this place to last. It was going to last. The night was fully dark by the time the last of the workers packed up. Some of them would be back tomorrow to finish the lot and complete the counter. Some were done for the night in every sense, sleeping in their vehicles or at the motel down the highway, having given a Saturday to something they owed no one. Emma stood at the door and watched them go, saying thank you to each face she could catch, shaking hands she'd never shaken before. She memorized none of it and all of it simultaneously, the way you absorb something too large for specifics, taking in the whole rather than the parts. The last one out was Jack Reynolds. He stopped at the door. She was standing just inside it. "Tomorrow by 4, he said. "Everything will be done." "Jack." She looked at him. "I don't know how to say what I'm supposed to say here." You don't have to say anything," he said. "I want to." He waited. She thought about Claire, the sister with the diner in Nevada, and the open door in the funeral full of strangers. She thought about what it cost a person to watch something and not pay enough attention and then live with that for 9 years. "She would have been proud of you today," Emma said. Claire, whatever she was made of, she'd recognize this. Jack Reynolds looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that he didn't put words to, and she didn't ask him to. Then he nodded once and walked out into the dark parking lot, and the door fell closed behind him. Emma locked it. She turned around and faced the cafe, her father's cafe. Her cafe, the place she'd nearly lost and hadn't, the place that was going to smell like sawdust for a week and like coffee forever. Lily appeared from the back, sleepy-eyed, jacket in hand. "Time to go home," she said. "Time to go home," Emma said. She took her daughter's hand. They walked out together through the parking lot, past the half-resurfaced gravel and the parked truck they'd retrieve tomorrow, past the space where the old refrigeration unit had been loaded out and the new one waited to be connected in the morning. Lily, half asleep, said into the darkness, "Mama, I think everything's going to be okay." Emma held her daughter's hand and looked up at the sky full of stars, the way it was after rain, the way it was on clear nights in the desert when nothing was between you and the distance. "Yeah, baby," she said. "I think so too." The cafe reopened on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after the storm. Emma unlocked the front door at 5 o'clock, the same as every other day. Same motion, same key, same slight resistance in the lock that had always been there, and apparently always would be. But the door she pushed open led into something different now, and she stood in the doorway for a moment, just registering that difference before she went inside and got to work. The counter was the first thing. She touched it every morning now before she did anything else, ran her hand along the new surface, feeling the place where they'd worked her father's original countertop into the frame, the seam between old and new, so skillfully done that you had to know where to look. Tony Reyes had come back on the second day specifically to make sure the transition was right. He'd stood there with his hand on the wood, the same way she stood with her hand on it now, checking for something only he could articulate, some standard of rightness that mattered to him beyond what anyone would have noticed. The new grill came on perfectly. She'd had 2 days to learn it before the reopening, cooking for herself and Lily, and nobody else getting the feel of even heat. No compensation necessary, every burner working exactly the way a burner was supposed to work. It still felt slightly unreal. She kept expecting something to be wrong. Nothing was wrong. Gus Tanner was first through the door at 5:12, same as always. He sat on a stool, looked around the cafe, the way he always looked around a room, and said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then he said, "That's a good counter." "It is," Emma agreed. "The old one had that soft spot on the right end." "I know. Used to put my cup there on purpose to annoy you." Emma looked at him. "I know that too." He smiled into his coffee. It was a small smile, but it was real, and Gus Tanner's real smiles were rare enough to notice. "Good to have you back," he said. "I wasn't gone," she said. "No," he said. "You were just getting ready." The morning rush was bigger than before. Word had moved through Ridgecrest the way word moved in a small town, person to person, unreliable in detail but consistent in direction. The cafe was open and the cafe was different, and people who hadn't been in months showed up out of something that might have been curiosity or might have been something closer to loyalty, showing up late to the party. Emma ran the grill steadily for 3 hours without a real break. She didn't mind. She'd been running grills for most of her adult life, and this new one that worked perfectly and never surprised her, was something close to joy to cook on. By 9 o'clock, she'd had to restock eggs twice. By 10, she'd run out of the pie she'd made the night before and started a second one. By 11, she was doing something she almost didn't recognize. At first, she was doing fine. Actually fine. Not managing, not coping, not holding things together with effort and willpower and the refusal to stop moving. Just fine in the ordinary way that she'd forgotten ordinary could feel. She stopped at the counter for a moment, both hands on her father's old wood, and let herself feel it. The bell over the door rang. She looked up. Michael Dawson walked in. She knew him immediately, though she'd only ever seen him. Horizontal face, gray and sweating, collapsed on wet asphalt in the dark. He was different, upright, taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered, moving carefully in the way of someone whose ribs had been recently reminded of their fragility. He was in his mid-40s, and he had the particular look of a man who'd been through something and was still working out where to put it. He saw her and stopped just inside the door. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Emma said, "You should be sitting down. Those ribs need another 2 weeks at least." He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Danny said you'd do that." "Do what?" "Go straight to the practical thing." She gestured at the counter stools. "Sit down, Michael." He sat. He moved slowly, and she watched him settle onto the stool with the slight, wincing care of a man trying very hard not to show he was in pain. She poured him coffee without asking. He wrapped both hands around the cup the same way Danny Ortiz had done, and she thought there was probably something in that gesture, in the way these men held cups, that had to do with years of cold mornings and long roads, and the particular comfort of something warm. "I wanted to come sooner," he said. "They wouldn't let me drive." They were right. Probably. He looked at the counter, then up at her. "I owe you something I don't have a word for." "You don't owe me anything." "Emma." His voice was quiet, certain. "I was gone. You understand what I'm saying? Not gone like I passed out. Gone like I was somewhere else. And then I heard a voice and it brought me back, and I opened my eyes, and you were there." He looked at her directly. "You were the first thing I saw when I came back." She held his gaze. "You came back yourself," she said. "I just said your name." "You kept saying it," he said. "Every time I started to drift, stay with me. Stay with me." He shook his head slightly, carefully minding the concussion. "I heard it every time." The cafe was doing its mid-morning thing around them, 2 truckers at a table, the older woman who'd started coming every other day since the news segment, someone in the back booth she didn't recognize. Ordinary. And in the middle of it, this man she'd met in the dark, telling her she'd pulled him back from somewhere far. "I'm glad you stayed," she said simply. He nodded. He drank his coffee. After a while, he said, "How are you doing, for real? Not the version you tell people." She looked at him. "Why do you ask it that way?" "Because I've watched Jack around you," he said, "and Jack doesn't ask how people are doing. He watches until he figures it out himself. The fact that he keeps asking Danny how you are tells me he's not sure. And if Jack's not sure, there's something you're not saying." Emma leaned on the counter. She hadn't expected this. She'd expected gratitude. She'd prepared for gratitude, had her deflections ready. She hadn't expected to be read. "The cafe is good," she said. "The numbers are better. The attention from the news segment brought people in, which I didn't ask for and don't entirely know how to feel about, but the practical effect has been real." She paused. "The bank there's still ground to cover. The mortgage is a monthly reality. It's better than it was. It's not where I need it to be." "What do you need?" "Time," she said. "I just need time. The traffic has to sustain. People have to keep coming, not just because of a story, but because the food is good and the place is worth coming to." She looked around at her cafe, at the new wiring and the rebuilt counter and the grill humming in the kitchen and her father's handwriting on the chalkboard menu that she'd kept every letter of, because some things you don't change. "I just need time to prove it holds." Michael Dawson looked at her steadily. "It'll hold," he said. "You held it this long on nothing. With something, it'll hold." She almost said something sharp about optimism, not paying mortgages. She stopped herself, because he wasn't being optimistic. He was being factual, and there was a difference. "Eat something," she said instead. "You look like you haven't had a real meal since the hospital." Han had eggs and toast and 2 cups of coffee and didn't argue about the check when she put it down. He paid it, left a tip that was larger than she'd have accepted if she'd been paying attention, and stood up to go with the slow, careful movement of someone nursing damaged ribs. At the door, he stopped. Jack's going to call you this week, he said. Emma looked up. About what? He'll tell you himself, Michael said. I'm just saying, when he calls, listen to the whole thing before you respond. He's got a way of front-loading things so they sound bigger than they are and the actual ask is usually reasonable. Emma stared at him. What is he asking? Michael smiled. It was a good smile, the kind that had something old behind it. He'll call you, he said, and walked out. She stood at the counter for a full minute after the door closed, running through possibilities, coming up with nothing definitive, and finally going back to the grill because there were eggs to cook and she could not stand there speculating all day. Jack called Thursday afternoon. She'd been expecting it since Michael left, which meant she'd been half waiting for 2 days, which meant she answered on the second ring. You talked to Michael, he said, not a question. He came in Tuesday, she said. He told me you were going to call and to listen to the whole thing before I responded. A pause. He's not wrong about that. So talk. Jack was quiet for a moment in the particular way that meant he was organizing. The media attention, you've had the news segment, Christine Adler's article, the shares, it's built something. Not just traffic to your cafe, something broader. People are responding to what you represent. I don't represent anything, Emma said. I made food. Emma, his voice was patient. You can believe that privately. Publicly, it doesn't matter what you believe, it matters what people see. And what people see is a woman who chose compassion when it cost her something, who held on to something that mattered, who didn't quit. He paused. There are people who want to formalize that, who want to build on it. What does formalize mean? There's a woman in Phoenix. Her name is Dana Cortez. She runs a foundation, the Cortez Community Foundation, that supports small businesses in underserved areas. She reached out to me after the segment aired. She wants to meet with you. Emma processed this. A foundation. A real one, not charity, an investment structure. They provide operational support, business development resources. Sometimes capital to businesses that serve a community function. Like a cafe on a highway in a desert town, that's the only place for 30 miles where a trucker can get a decent meal and a human conversation. Jack, listen to the whole thing, he said, calm, steady. I told you it would sound bigger than it is. She breathed. Okay. Dana Cortez is not looking to own anything or control anything. She's looking to support things worth supporting. She saw what you built here, what you kept building after your husband left and your father died, and the bank started closing in, and she thinks it's worth investing in. Another pause. I'm telling you this because I've met her. She's real. Her foundation is real, and I think you should hear her out. Emma stood behind her counter with her hand flat on her father's wood and thought about all the times she'd been told no, about the bank which had said no every time she'd asked for flexibility, about the city inspector who had said fix it or we close you, as if the money to fix it grew in the parking lot, about her husband who hadn't said no but had done something worse. He'd said yes for years. Yes, he was handling things. Yes, everything was fine. Right up until the Tuesday morning, he wasn't there anymore. A foundation run by a woman she'd never met, arranged through a man she'd met in a storm, offered through a situation that had started with a man bleeding on her doorstep. When does she want to meet? Emma said. She's flexible, Jack said. She can come to you. Have her come here, Emma said. If she wants to understand what this place is, she should see it. A pause and then something in Jack's voice that she'd started to recognize. Not quite warmth, but the space that warmth moved through. I'll tell her, he said. Dana Cortez arrived the following Monday at 2 in the afternoon, which was deliberately chosen because it was the quiet period, the post-lunch lull, when the cafe breathed. Emma had not prepared anything special. She thought about it, thought about closing early to clean, about making the place look its best, about staging it in some way. Then she'd thought about what her father would have done and served a regular day and let the place speak for itself. Dana Cortez was 53, compact, direct, with dark eyes that moved around a room the way experienced assessor's eyes moved, gathering, cataloging, connecting. She sat across from Emma in the corner booth and ordered coffee and a piece of the pie that Emma had been making every morning since the reopening, and she ate the pie before she said anything about why she was there, which Emma respected. This is a good pie, Dana said. Thank you. My mother made pie, she said. Ran a tamale business out of our kitchen in Phoenix for 20 years. Never formalized it, never scaled it, just made it and sold it and fed our family on it. She looked at Emma. I spent the first part of my career being embarrassed by that. Thought small meant unimportant. It took me a long time to understand that small and essential are not the same thing. Emma looked at her. What changed your mind? She died, Dana said simply, and 300 people came to the memorial. Most of them I'd never seen. They weren't there for family. They were there because she'd fed them when they needed feeding, because her kitchen had been a place they could afford, where they were treated right, where they mattered. She set down her coffee cup. After that, I spent the next 20 years building infrastructure to protect places like hers. So they don't have to wait until someone dies to understand what they were worth. The cafe was quiet around them. Emma looked at this woman who had built something real out of grief and understanding and said, "What are you offering me specifically?" Donna opened a folder, professional but not performative, the folder of someone who respected other people's time. Operational grant to cover 6 months of mortgage obligations while traffic stabilizes. Business development consultations specifically around sustainable revenue streams, beyond daily food service, catering events, community programming. Access to our supplier network, which will reduce your food costs by approximately 18 to 22% based on your current volume. She looked up. And someone in our network who handles bookkeeping part-time for small business clients, because you are doing your own books alone at night after a 12-hour shift, and that is not a sustainable system. Emma stared at her. How do you know about the books? Christine Adler's article mentioned it. You told her. She had. She'd forgotten she'd said it. What do you want in return? Quarterly reporting, a willingness to participate in community programming, twice-a-year events we organize that highlight essential small businesses, and your permission to use Carter's Cafe as a case study in our grant applications. Dana looked at her steadily. That's it. No equity, no control, no obligation beyond what I've described. Emma looked at the folder, at the numbers on the first page that represented 6 months of breathing room, of not counting haze, of not waking at 4:45. Calculating the distance between what she had and what she owed. I need to read this properly, she said. The whole thing. Of course, Dana said. Take whatever time you need. And I need to have someone else look at it. She thought of Gus Tanner, who she trusted, but who wasn't a lawyer. She thought of Christine Adler, who was sharp and had contacts. A second set of eyes. Absolutely, Dana said. I'd be concerned if you didn't. Emma looked at her for a moment. Why Carter's Cafe specifically? There are places like this all over Arizona, all over the country. Dana held her gaze. Because of what you did in that parking lot, she said. Not the opening the door part, though that matters. The walking across the parking lot part, towards something everyone else was walking away from. She paused. That kind of instinct doesn't come from training. It comes from something deeper. And the places that have it at their center, they're the ones worth protecting. Emma sat with that. The door opened and Lily came in from school, backpack, swinging, stopping, when she saw the unfamiliar woman in the corner booth. She looked at her mother, assessed the situation with a particular radar of a child who'd grown up reading rooms and climbed onto her counter stool without interrupting. Dana watched this and said nothing, but something in her expression did something small and real. Emma picked up the folder. I'll call you by the end of the week, she said. Whenever you're ready, Dana said. She left 15 minutes later. Emma watched her car pull out of the parking lot and then stood at the window for a moment, processing the conversation, the way she processed things in fragments that she turned over individually before she put them together. Lily said from the counter, "Was that a business meeting?" It was. Was it good? Emma looked at her daughter. I think it might have been very good, she said. Cool, Lily said, and went back to her homework. The week moved fast. Emma read the folder twice, took notes, called Christine Adler, who read it a third time and came back with 4 specific questions that were exactly the right 4 questions, and then called a woman. Christine knew who did pro bono legal work for small businesses and had the whole thing reviewed by Thursday afternoon. The answer from every direction was that it was legitimate, favorable, and worth doing. She called Dana Cortez on Friday. Yes, she said when Dana answered. Dana didn't make a production of it. Good, she said. I'll have the formal documents to you Monday. We can move quickly on the first disbursement. Emma hung up and stood in the back office and let herself feel it, the specific feeling of a problem that had been living in her chest for 3 years, beginning finally to loosen its grip. Not gone, not solved completely, but different. The weight of it distributed now held by more than just her hands. She went out to the grill and cooked dinner for herself and Lily, and they ate it at the counter together, which they sometimes did when the cafe was closed, and they had it to themselves perched on the stools with plates in front of them and the comfortable noise of each other's company. Lily said, "Are we going to be okay for real?" Emma looked at her, 7 years old and asking the real question without flinching. Her father's daughter, Emma thought. Her grandmother's granddaughter. Something that ran straight through the line. "For real," Emma said. "Yes." Lily accepted this and ate her dinner. What Emma didn't tell her, what she was still working out herself, was that the okay she was talking about was different from the one she'd been aiming for. For 3 years, okay had meant surviving, making the payment, keeping the lights on, staying one step ahead of the thing that wanted to take everything. She'd been aiming for survival like it was the destination. It wasn't the destination, it was just the starting point. She understood that now in a way she hadn't before the storm, before Michael Dawson, before Jack Reynolds, standing beside her saying considerably more than 60. The survival was just the condition you maintained so you could get to the actual thing. The actual thing was Lily eating dinner at the counter, was Gus Tanner, and his small true smile was Tony Reyes driving from Nevada to install a grill. Right, because he wanted the world to be a certain kind of world for his daughter. The actual thing was the door. Her father had built the door. She'd kept it open. That was the work. That had always been the work. Jack Reynolds walked through it on a Saturday morning 3 weeks later. No motorcycles, no crew, no advance notice. Just him in a truck this time, pulling into the parking lot on a regular morning and coming through the front door, the way anyone came through the front door, the bell ringing over his head. He sat at the counter. He looked at the scene between old and new and ran his hand along it the way she'd watched him watch things with a specific attention. "Tony did that," she said. "I know, he told me." He looked up. "How's it sitting with you?" "The counter. All of it." She poured his coffee, set it down, thought about how to answer a question that was both simple and not. "Some mornings I come in and I still can't believe it's real," she said. "I'll turn on the grill and it works the first time every burner, and I'll stand there for a second, like I'm waiting for something to go wrong." She paused. "I don't know if that goes away." "Probably not completely," he said. "But it changes. The waiting for things to go wrong becomes background noise instead of the main thing." She looked at him. "Is that from experience?" 30 years of it," he said. He took a moment. "Then, can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything." "Claire," she said, "her diner. Did she know what she was building? Did she know what it meant to people?" He held the coffee cup. She watched him think about it, genuinely think, not perform thinking. "No," he said finally. "She just did the thing in front of her. She never called it anything, never made speeches about it. She just kept the door open, same as you." He looked at the counter. "I used to think she was naive, that she didn't see the world clearly. It took me about 15 years after she died to understand she saw it more clearly than I did. She just chose to respond to what it could be instead of what it was." The cafe was its regular morning self around them. The bell rang, and two of Emma's new regulars came in, a couple from a ranch about 40 minutes east, who'd started coming twice a week since the reopening, who had become the kind of regulars who didn't need to be asked what they wanted. Emma poured 2 more cups and took them over and came back to the counter. "I've been thinking about the foundation," she said. "The Cortez grant. What Dana said about community programming events." She looked at him. "There's something this place could be, beyond a cafe, a place where things happen, where people who don't have a lot of places to be can come," and she stopped, recognizing she was trying to articulate something still forming. "My father called it the purpose of it. He always said the cafe had a purpose beyond serving food. I thought I understood what he meant. I'm only now figuring out what he actually meant." Jack Reynolds looked at her. "What did he mean?" "He meant it was a place where people could be full," she said. "Not just from food. Full the way you get when someone sees you and treats you right, and you leave feeling like you counted." She looked at the room. "That's the thing worth protecting. That's the thing worth building." He was quiet for a moment. "Then you should say that to Dana." "I'm going to," Emma said. He drank his coffee. He was in no hurry, which she'd come to recognize as deliberate. He moved at a pace that refused to be rushed, which was its own statement. She'd been learning in the weeks since the storm that there were things Jack Reynolds said with his presence that he never said in words, and that learning to read the difference was part of understanding who he was. "You're staying in Ridgecrest," she said. Not a question, he looked at her. For a while, she nodded. She didn't ask why. She knew why, or she knew enough of why to not need the rest. "My daughter asked about you," she said. He blinked. It was one of the only times she'd seen something catch him off guard. "What did she ask?" "She asked if you were going to keep coming around." Emma looked at him directly. She said, and I'm quoting, "He's the kind of person who fixes things." Something moved through Jack Reynolds' face that she didn't have a name for. Something that was old and had been in storage for a long time and was finding its way out slowly, carefully, the way things do when they've been kept back long enough. "I told her yes," Emma said. "Was that right?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he set down his coffee cup, and his voice when he spoke was something she'd never quite heard from him before, not managed, not deliberate, just real. "Yeah," he said. "That was right." The bell over the door rang. Two more people came in. Emma went to pour coffee, moving behind her counter her father's wood under her hands. And Carter's Cafe did what it had always done, what it was built to do, what one woman had refused to let it stop doing, through 3 years of hardship and a husband who left, and a bank that loomed, and a storm that had turned out to be the beginning of something instead of the end. It stayed open. It stayed warm. It stayed full. 3 months after the storm, Emma Carter stopped counting days. She didn't decide to stop. It just happened. One morning she came in at 4:45, turned on the grill, started the coffee, and realized somewhere between cracking the first eggs and wiping down the counter that she hadn't done the calculation, hadn't measured the distance between what she owed and what she had. Hadn't woken up with the number in her head the way she'd woken up with it every morning for 3 years, that constant background arithmetic of survival. She stood at the grill and noticed its absence, the way you notice silence after noise has been going on so long you stopped hearing it. She went back to cooking, but something had shifted quietly without announcement, the way the most important things always shifted. The Cortez grant had come through in the fourth week. The first disbursement covered 4 months of mortgage obligations at once, not 6, because Emma had negotiated it down to 4 on the advice of the pro bono lawyer Christine had connected her to wanting to preserve the remaining funds in the foundation's operating budget for businesses with more acute need. Dana Cortez had called her after the paperwork was signed and said in a voice that was professional and warm at the same time, that was the right call. Most people take everything they're offered. And Emma had said, "I only needed what I need." And Dana had said, "That's exactly why you qualified." The bookkeeper's name was Rosa. She was 61, semi-retired, sharp as a blade, and she arrived every Thursday morning at 8 with a thermos of her own coffee, because she'd decided Emma's was better than what she made at home, but she didn't want to seem presumptuous about it. Within 3 weeks, she'd reorganize Emma's accounting system in a way that saved Emma 2 hours a week and revealed 3 separate areas where Emma had been quietly losing money through inefficiency, not negligence. Just the invisible cost of one person doing everything alone with no time to look at it clearly. Emma looked at the numbers Rosa showed her and felt something complicated. Equal parts relief and anger at herself. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. Rosa looked at her over her reading glasses. "Since you inherited the cafe, probably. These patterns don't develop overnight." She paused. "Don't be angry at yourself. You were keeping the place alive with your bare hands. You didn't have hands left for optimization." Emma looked at the corrected column. "How much has it cost me?" Rosa gave her the number. Emma sat with it. "Okay," she said finally. "Fix it." "Already did," Rosa said and turned to the next page. The supplier network Dana had mentioned reduced Emma's food costs by 21% in the first month. 21%. Emma had run the math 4 times because the first 3 times she didn't believe it. It was the difference calculated over a year between barely holding and genuinely holding. Between white-knuckling every month and having a margin, real margin, not imaginary margin. The actual kind where you could see it in the numbers and it didn't disappear when you looked at it directly. She hired Angela. Angela was 24 from Ridgecrest, originally had been working at a gas station 40 minutes away because there hadn't been enough work in town to stay. Emma offered her 4 days a week breakfast and lunch shifts, competitive wages by local standards, with the honest caveat that this was a cafe in a small town and it wasn't going to make anyone rich. Angela said she wasn't looking to be rich, she was looking to come home. She started the following Monday and was behind the counter like she'd been there for years inside of a week, which told Emma something about what it meant to work somewhere you actually wanted to be. The cafe filled up. Not just with the old regulars, though Gus Tanner was on his stool every Tuesday and Thursday with the reliability of weather. New people. The out-of-town couple from the ranch had started bringing friends. The older woman who'd squeezed Emma's hand and left a $40 tip came in every single week and had started bringing her sister. Christine Adler had run a follow-up piece at the 2-month mark that had driven another wave of attention smaller than the first. More specific, the kind of attention that translated into actual customers rather than just shares. And the bikers came, not in the numbers they'd come for the repairs, but regularly in groups of 2 or 5 or 10 passing through on the highway and pulling off at Carter's Cafe the way people pull off at a place they've decided belongs to them a little. They always called ahead now, which was a courtesy that had started appearing without anyone being asked. Someone would text Danny Ortiz. Danny would call Emma. Emma would know to have extra coffee ready and the back section open. It had become a system without being formally organized, the way good systems sometimes emerge from people paying attention to each other. Michael Dawson came in twice a month. His ribs had healed. His concussion had cleared. He sat at the counter and ate eggs, and they talked about ordinary things, the road, the weather, how his sister's kids were doing what Emma was planning for the community event Dana's foundation was organizing in the spring. He had become, without either of them quite intending it, someone Emma thought of as a friend, a real one. The kind that showed up on a Tuesday for no reason other than they wanted to see how you were. She was making a list of the things she didn't have words for, and he was on it. Jack Reynolds was on it too. He'd been staying in Ridgecrest, not permanently, not in any way that had been discussed or defined, but consistently. He had a room at the motel down the highway that he seemed to have arranged on an indefinite basis, and he came into the cafe most mornings before 8 and drank his coffee and stayed as long as he stayed, which was sometimes 20 minutes and sometimes 2 hours, depending on what was happening and what was needed. He'd fix 3 things into the cafe without being asked. A drawer in the back office that had been sticking for months. The ice machine that had been making a noise she'd learned to tune out. A loose hinge on the storage room door that she'd been meaning to get to since before the storm. Each time she'd noticed the thing was fixed before she'd said anything, and each time she'd looked at him and he'd looked at her, and the look contained the whole conversation without requiring the words. I wasn't trying to take care of her. She'd understood that from early on, and it had mattered. He was just present, available, paying attention. There was a difference between a man who showed up to rescue and a man who showed up to stand beside, and she'd learned that difference the hard way with Marcus and was able to recognize it clearly now when she saw it. She recognized it clearly in Jack Reynolds. It was a Wednesday morning in the 3rd month when he came in and sat at the counter, and she looked at him and knew something was different before he said a word. He had that quality he had sometimes contained, more deliberate than usual organizing. "Drink your coffee first," she said, pouring it. He looked at her. "I haven't said anything." "You're about to say something large," she said. "Drink your coffee first." He drank his coffee. Then he put the cup down and looked at her directly the way he did when there was no point in approaching sideways. "I've been handling something for the past 6 weeks," he said. "I wanted to be sure before I said anything." Emma leaned on the counter. "About what? Your husband," he said. The word hit the air between them, and everything else in the cafe went quiet in her head. Not the actual noise, but her awareness of it. She looked at him and didn't say anything, waiting. "I have people in a lot of places," Jack said. "People who are good at finding things. I didn't ask them to look for him specifically. I asked them to look into the debts he left, whether the way he structured them was legal, whether there was anything that could be challenged." He paused. There was. Emma's hands were flat on the counter. "What did you find?" 3 of the loans he took against the property were structured fraudulently," Jack said. "He forged your signature on 2 of them. The 3rd used documentation that wasn't valid at the time of the loan, which means the debt associated with those 3 loans is not legally yours." The cafe was doing its morning thing entirely around her, and she was not inside it. She was somewhere else processing what he'd just said. "How much?" she said. Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. He told her. She closed her eyes. The number was substantial, not everything, not the whole of what she'd been carrying, but enough. Enough that its removal from the calculation changed the calculation entirely. Why didn't you tell me when you found it? She said. Because I wanted to be certain, he said. And because I wanted to have someone who could do something about it before I put it in your head. Because putting something like that in someone's head and then having it come to nothing would have been worse than not saying it. She looked at him for a long moment. You've had a lawyer looking at this. For 6 weeks, he said. Her name is Patricia Huang. She's based in Phoenix. She specializes in exactly this kind of fraudulent debt structure, and she's reviewed everything. She believes you have a strong case. He slid a card across the counter. She's ready to talk to you whenever you are. Emma picked up the card. Patricia Huang, Financial Fraud and Consumer Protection. A Phoenix address. Jack. She looked up from the card. She stopped. She was trying to find the right word for what this was, and coming up with something that wasn't a word. It was a feeling, enormous and complicated, and somewhere between gratitude and the specific pain of learning that something you'd been carrying didn't have to be as heavy as you'd thought. Why did you do this? He looked at her. Because he left you with something that wasn't yours to carry, he said, and that's not something I can leave alone. She held the card. She thought about Marcus, something she actively tried not to do, had trained herself out of for the sake of survival, and now was doing involuntarily standing in her cafe at 8 in the morning. She thought about the Tuesday he'd left. She thought about the collectors and the documents and the slow, terrible education and what had been done to her while she'd thought they were building something together. She'd carried it as her failure. That was the part nobody talked about, not the debt, but the shame of the debt, the way she'd internalized it as evidence of something wrong with her judgment, her choices herself. She'd carried that shame alongside everything else, quietly, never putting it down, because she didn't know she was allowed to. She was allowed to put it down. Okay, she said. She put the card in her pocket. I'll call her today. She called Patricia Huang at noon, between the breakfast rush and the lunch prep, standing in the back office with the door closed. 45 minutes later, she came out knowing 3 things. The case was strong. The process would take time, and there was a path forward that she hadn't known existed 3 months ago. She went back to the grill and cooked lunch and didn't tell anyone what she was feeling because she hadn't finished feeling it yet. Some things needed processing space before they became words. Lily found her that evening in the kitchen of their apartment, sitting at the table with her hands around a cup of tea that had gone cold. Mama, Lily said. She sat down across from her without being asked, the way she'd been doing lately, some new instinct for when her mother needed company. At 7, almost 8, now the birthday was coming, she was developing a quality Emma recognized from her own father. A stillness, a readiness to just be present without requiring anything from the moment. I found out something today, Emma said, about some of the money we owe, the debt your dad left. Lily looked at her carefully. Bad thing or good thing? Good thing, Emma said. A complicated good thing. Lily considered this. Is complicated good better than simple good? Emma thought about it. Sometimes, she said, sometimes the complicated ones are better because they took longer to get there and you understand why they matter. Lily seemed satisfied with this. She got up and put the cold tea in the microwave without being asked, reheated it, and put it back in front of Emma. Then she sat back down. Jack told you, she said, not a question. Emma looked at her daughter. How did you know that? He looks at you like he's trying to make sure you're okay, Lily said, like he's watching for the thing that needs fixing. And when he finds it, he fixes it without making a big thing about it. She shrugged with 8-year-old matter-of-factness. He fixed my crayons. He fixed the drawer in your office. He fixed the thing that went wrong with the money. She looked at Emma. He's a fixer. Emma sat with her daughter across from her and the reheated tea in her hands and thought about what it meant that her almost 8-year-old understood the situation with more clarity and less complication than Emma herself had managed. He is, Emma said. Is that okay, Lily asked. Carefully, that someone helps fix things. Emma looked at her daughter. The question was guileless and enormous at the same time. Yes, she said. It's okay. It took me a while to learn that, but yes, it's okay. Lily nodded. Then she went to get her own cup of tea, which she made in the particular way she'd been making tea lately. Too much honey, not enough steeping time, and sat back across from her mother, and they drank their tea together in the kitchen that smelled like the dinner they'd had, and the coffee that always rose from the cafe below, and the particular smell of a home that was genuinely and without caveat theirs. The spring community event came on a Saturday in April. Dana Cortez's foundation had organized it, but the structure of it had been Emma's idea. Not a fundraiser, not a promotional event, not anything that required people to have money or a reason beyond wanting to be somewhere. Just the cafe open with food and a gathering. People from Ridgecrest, people from the highway, people from 3 counties over who'd heard about Carter's Cafe and had been meaning to come. They put tables outside. She and Angela and Danny Ortiz, who'd shown up Friday afternoon without being asked and spent 4 hours helping set up. Jack Reynolds was there moving tables, running extension cords, doing the particular kind of work that doesn't have a title, but without which nothing else functions. Michael Dawson came early and stayed late and ended up cooking outside at the grill they'd set up in the parking lot, which turned out to be something he was genuinely excellent at and clearly enjoyed moving through the smoke with an ease that made Emma think he'd done it before and missed it. By noon, there were more people in and around Carter's Cafe than had ever been there, at one time more than the night of the storm even. Families with children, old men from the town who'd been quietly skeptical of Emma for years and were now standing in her parking lot eating food someone had made them and talking to people they'd never met. The older woman who'd become a weekly regular, her name was Frances, Emma had learned. She'd been a school teacher for 34 years, was sitting at a table with a group of younger women from a ranch collective 40 miles out, and the conversation was animated and real. Gus Tanner came, which surprised Emma, because Gus was not a person who came to events. He showed up at 11, parked his truck, sat at his usual counter stool, which was inside and therefore not the center of the action, and watched the parking lot through the window with the expression of a man who was being proven right about something he'd suspected for a while. Emma brought him coffee. "Why are you watching from in here?" "I'm not a crowd person," he said. "You're at the crowd." "I'm at the cafe," he said. "The crowd is outside." "Different thing." She left him to his distinction. Christine Adler was there with a camera shooting footage for a piece she was doing about the foundation's work. She moved through the gathering with professional ease, talking to people listening more than she talked, which was the quality Emma had recognized in her from the first interview that made her good at what she did. She found Emma in the kitchen, mid-afternoon, standing at the grill with the particular focused concentration of someone in their element. "You should come outside," Christine said. "Look at what you built." "I'm cooking," Emma said. "Emma." She looked up. "Come outside," Christine said. "Just for a minute." She handed the spatula to Angela and went outside and stood at the edge of the parking lot and looked. So many people talking and eating and laughing, children running between tables, someone's dog lying in the shade and being petted by 3 separate people in rotation. The sound of it was alive in a way she'd never heard in this parking lot, which had spent most of its existence as an empty stretch of gravel between a cafe and a highway. She saw Frances, the retired school teacher, gesturing at something she was telling the women from the ranch collective. Her whole face lit up. She saw a man she didn't recognize, maybe 50 trucker type, sitting across from Danny Ortiz and talking with the ease of people who'd found something in common faster than expected. She saw Lily weaving between tables, distributing paper napkins with the seriousness of someone performing an essential function. She saw Jack Reynolds standing near the back of the lot talking to a man she didn't know, and at some point he looked across the space and found her the way he always found her, like he always knew where she was in a room which she had stopped finding unnerving and started finding simply true. He said something to the man he was talking to, and then he walked over to her. He stood beside her and looked at the same thing she was looking at. "Your father would have," he started. "Don't," she said gently. He stopped. "I know," she said. "You don't have to say it, I know." He nodded. They stood side by side in the parking lot of Carter's Cafe and watched the thing that the door had started. The legal process with Patricia Huang moved forward through the spring and into early summer. It was not fast, nothing in law was fast, Patricia had said on day one, and Emma had adjusted her expectations accordingly. But it moved. There were filings and responses and a deposition that Emma had prepared for with Patricia over 2 long phone calls, going through every document, every date, every signature that was and wasn't hers. The moment she'd expected to feel something large and unmanageable came during the deposition when the opposing counsel, A man from a bank collections firm who had the manner of someone used to winning by attrition put a document in front of her and said, "Is that your signature?" Emma looked at the document, at the signature that was not her signature, that someone who'd shared her bed for 7 years had put there in her name on a document that had cost her 3 years of white-knuckled survival. "No," she said, "that is not my signature." "Are you certain?" "I am absolutely certain," she said. Patricia Huang had told her to stay neutral, professional. Don't perform emotion, don't suppress it completely. Just be factual and certain. Emma managed this. What she felt and what she showed were two different things, and she kept them in two different places for the duration of the 3-hour proceeding. In the car afterward, Patricia said, "You were excellent." "I was angry," Emma said. "I know," Patricia said. "That's why you were excellent. Anger properly directed is just clarity." The case settled in July. Not a trial the bank's legal team faced with the documentation of forged signatures and invalid paperwork chose settlement over the exposure of a full proceeding. Emma received a letter from Patricia on a Tuesday afternoon with the terms laid out in the clean, unemotional language of legal documents, and she sat in the back office and read it 3 times and then called Patricia and said, "Is this real?" "It's real," Patricia said. Emma put the phone down. She put both hands on her father's old wood. She'd moved a section of it to the desk, a piece left over from the counter restoration because she'd needed it somewhere she could touch, and she sat there for a while. Rosa knocked on the door at 4:30. "I have the monthly numbers," she said. She stopped when she saw Emma's face. "What happened?" Emma told her. Rosa sat down. She was 61 years old and had seen a lot, and she sat there and listened, and when Emma was done, she said, "Your father would have—" Emma laughed. "That's the second time someone started a sentence that way in 3 months." Rosa smiled. "Finish it yourself," she said. "You know the ending." Emma thought about it. About Ray Carter, who had built a cafe on 10 years of saved dollars, and the conviction that a place on a highway needed to exist and matter and serve. Who had told her that you discover who you truly are when someone needs your help. Who had built a door and taught her to keep it open. He would have made coffee, Emma said, and called it a good day. "Then do that," Rosa said. Emma made coffee. She brought cups out to the counter for Rosa and Angela and called Gus Tanner, who was not due in until Thursday, but who showed up anyway inside 40 minutes, which told her he understood what the call was without her having to say it explicitly. She called Christine Adler. Christine said, "I knew it," with a quiet ferocity that was genuine. She called Dana Cortez. Dana said, "This is the part I don't get tired of," and meant it. She called Michael Dawson. He said, "Emma." He said it again, just her name, Emma. And somehow that was all of it. She didn't call Jack Reynolds. He walked through the door at 5:30. She didn't know if someone had told him or if he'd known the way. He knew things about what was happening in her orbit. That particular attentiveness she'd stopped trying to explain. He sat at the counter. She poured his coffee. He looked at her face and read what was there and said simply, "Done." "Done," she said. He nodded. He picked up his coffee. He said, "Good." That was all. That was enough. August came in hot the way Arizona. August always did, and Carter's Cafe moved through it the way it moved through everything now. Steadily, fully, with Angelo at the grill 3 mornings a week, and Rosa at the books on Thursdays, and Gus on his stool on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the regulars who had become real regulars, the kind who knew each other's names. Now who had conversations that continued from week to week, who had made this place part of the rhythm of their lives. Lily turned 8 on a Wednesday. Emma closed the cafe for a birthday party that evening, the first time she'd closed for something other than exhaustion or necessity. Lily had asked for small. What she got was small by the standards of people who didn't know the situation. Just the people who mattered gathered in the cafe after hours, the lights low and the good tablecloths on, and a cake that Emma had made herself from a recipe her father had used for her own birthdays. Jack Reynolds came. He sat at the counter that held her father's wood in it, and watched Lily open one present at a time with the focused deliberation of a child who wanted to give each thing its full attention. Lily got to his gift last. It was small wrapped, simply a box about the size of her fist. She opened it with the same care and looked at what was inside and then looked at him. It was a set of crayons, professional grade, the kind that didn't break, 64 colors, a shade of red that was according to the label called Crimson Cardinal. Lily looked at him for a long moment. "You remembered," she said. "I remembered," he said. She got up from her chair. walked to the counter and hugged him. 8 years old and matter of fact about it, she just went and did it, both arms around him the way children do when they have decided someone deserves a hug, and there's no reason to complicate it. Jack Reynolds sat very still for a moment. Then he put one hand on the back of her head, brief and careful and real. Emma watched from across the room and said nothing and felt everything. Later, when the party had wound down and Lily was asleep on the back office cot with her new crayons arranged by color beside her, and Christine had gone, and Michael had gone, and Rosa had hugged Emma at the door, and the cafe was quiet, Emma and Jack sat at the counter together with the particular ease of two people who had gotten comfortable with each other's company without it being declared or formalized. "She's going to be fine," Jack said. "She's going to be extraordinary," Emma said. "She already is." He smiled at that. A real one. She'd cataloged the real ones over these months, the small ones and the rare full ones, and this was a real one. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said. "You always can. What happens now for you after all this?" She looked at him. "You have a chapter to run, a life in Nevada. This isn't your town." I was quiet for a moment. Then, "A town is just where the people you want to be around are," he said. "That moves." She held his gaze. "Jack, I know what you're asking," he said. "I don't have a clean answer. I know I'm not going anywhere fast. I know this place." He stopped, said it more carefully. "I know you're someone worth being around, worth staying for if staying is wanted." She looked at him for a long moment. Jack Reynolds, who had walked into her parking lot in a storm and watched her with steady eyes and seen something he recognized and come back and kept coming back and shown up in every way that mattered without ever requiring credit for it. "It's wanted," she said. He nodded once, like a decision confirmed rather than made, like he'd already known and had been waiting for the confirmation, patient and certain in the way he was always patient and certain. She picked up her coffee cup. He picked up his. The cafe was quiet around them the way it was in the deep evening, the chairs on the tables and the lights low and the highway outside moving with its distant, steady traffic. People going somewhere, people coming from somewhere, the endless movement of lives crossing each other in the dark. She thought about the night of the storm, about the sound of 60 motorcycles in her parking lot and a man on the ground in the 3 seconds she'd stood at her door deciding who she was. She thought about everything that had come from those 3 seconds. The bank payment and the note and the cruise and the grill and Dana Cortez and Patricia Huang and Rosa and Angela and Francis and the spring gathering and the legal settlement and all of it flowing directly from the moment she looked at Michael Dawson on the ground and chosen to walk toward him instead of away. She thought about what her father had built and what she'd protected and what she'd built on top of it layer by layer through everything that had tried to take it down. She put her hand on the counter, on the seam between old wood and new wood, the line where her father's work met the work of strangers who'd become something other than strangers, where the past met the present, where everything that had been survived had been transformed into something worth more than survival. The door of Carter's Cafe had been opened in a storm by a woman who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and it had stayed open every day since, through debt and abandonment, in 62 days, in a bad grill, in a sparking outlet, in a town that hadn't known what to make of her. It stayed open because Ray Carter had built it to stay open. It stayed open because Emma Carter had refused on every single day of 3 hard years to close it. And on the other side of everything, the storm and the strangers and the grief and the legal battles and the slow reconstruction of a life that was genuinely, completely without qualification, Carter's Cafe stood on its piece of Arizona highway, wired right and stocked well, and full of the kind of warmth that no inspector could measure and no bank could take, and it served everyone who walked through its door exactly what they came for. Not just food, not just coffee, but the thing Emma Carter's father had always said, a place like this was really for the thing that made a person leave feeling fuller than when they came and seen instead of overlooked, worth something instead of worth nothing, part of something instead of alone on a long road with nowhere that knew their name. The door was open. It had always been open, and now finally completely and for good, so was everything else.